Hey everyone, welcome to Module 6. We're going to go over your journal for this week, which is about sexual reproduction and biodiversity. You can see from this part of the module, it's kind of in a cluster, and because the questions aren't readily kind of divided out, sometimes students will miss answering certain questions, and so they end up losing points on the assignment. So what I have done is created a document, and you can do this the same way. And I just copied and pasted the part from the module that had the instructions, and then I just went ahead and wrote out the questions that you're supposed to answer based on this information above. So the first part of this assignment is about how bacteria reproduce and what factors do they rely on to increase their genetic variation, because they perform different types of asexual reproduction. And so there's certain things that bacteria undergo to make sure that they're not just making like cloned copies of each other. And you want to explain what the advantages and disadvantages of asexual reproduction is. Then you go into the other types of reproduction, which is sexual reproduction, which is what animals and plants perform. And so you want to talk about meiosis and how sexual reproduction can generate biodiversity amongst those organisms, and then what the advantages and disadvantages of sexual reproduction are, especially compared to asexual reproduction and evolution. In evolutionary terms, essentially, like, what is the advantage of sexual reproduction over asexual, and same thing, like vice versa, right? Like, what are the evolutionary advantages of asexual reproduction? What are the evolutionary disadvantages? And then kind of part 3 is talking about how we are starting to see loss of biodiversity in plants and animals, not only in the wild, but also like in how we are breeding livestock. This is especially true with like genetically modified plants that we use in our agriculture, since a majority of like corn and soybeans are produced through genetic modification. So you're going to look at, how can you explain the genetic erosion that we're seeing in agriculture? Are humans responsible for this? So the loss of biodiversity that we're seeing in agriculture, how can you explain that? And is it due to human influences? And then what are some solutions that could reverse this problem? And what are the consequences if we do nothing? So what are the consequences like to our agricultural system if we don't do anything and we just continue with the status quo? And then, do you think we can be affected by this genetic erosion in our daily life? And explain. So the genetic erosion that's occurring in agriculture. So there is not a lot of information here to help you answer these questions. Your readings can help you with kind of part 1 and part 2, but this is going to take some research, like this part 3 part. So I did post in the class announcements help for each one of these sections. So there's a link talking about bacteria reproduction. There's a video about asexual reproduction. This video talks about meiosis. This link talks about advantages and disadvantages of sexual reproduction. So on top of, your book resources, you can use these resources in the class announcements. And then for part 2, I went ahead and gave you a link to genetic erosion in crops, and then how genetics is kind of shaping our agriculture and our food to help you answer some of these questions. But let me know if you need any further resources, if you get stuck on something with this particular assignment. Mainly the thing to just watch out for is, since the questions are in this paragraph format and they're not kind of pieced out like this, a lot of students will forget to answer a part of a question. So I would go ahead and try to use this format so that way you don't miss anything. But let me know, like I said, if you need any help with anything.